Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this discussion, A Sense of Place, How to Create Community in a Fractured World. Never more important, I think. This is part of the Belonging and Community strand, so you can follow some of these ideas throughout the day. Like many Battle of Ideas discussions, although they're urgent and pertinent, they're not in a kind of conducted in a black and white way. Are we for or against community is not the discussion here today. The way this works is that we have 5 speakers on the panel. They'll each say about 5 minutes as an introduction, a sort of whetting your appetite, and then we'll have a conversation with you. We're very interested in what you think. You don't have to just ask questions, you can make points. We're also very lucky to be partnering with the Belonging Forum on this, a really interesting organisation that I urge you to check out after. But we're also very lucky to have Kim Samuel, the founder of it, speaking on the panel. She'll speak first. She's the founder of the Belonging Forum and author of On Belonging, Finding Connection in an Age of Isolation. You may have noticed it in the corridors of this of the church house, and I do urge you to read a copy. She's an educator and an activist. Following Kim, we'll hear from William Coulston, who's the party leader of the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. We'll then hear from Abbot Christopher Jameson. He's the Abbot President, the English Benedictine Congregation, and he's the author of this rather beautiful book, Finding the Language of Grace, Rediscovering Transcendence. We'll then hear from Michael Merrick. He is Director of Schools at the Diocese of Lancaster. He's a former teacher and an education and social commentator. And I was reminding him this morning of a program he did on Radio 4 some years ago when he had ginger hair, he tells me, really interesting on ideas about community and home and the stresses on people to move away from their community today. And then we'll hear from Dave Clements. He's a writer and policy advisor, and he's a contributing co-editor of The Future of Community. Again, a very interesting book. So a lot to get stuck into. But Kim, if I could just ask you to kick us off with your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I want to begin now, Tiffany, with what you just asked us. Of course, it's not controversial, community or not community, but sometimes I think it is. It's about who belongs, who is seen to belong in a community and who isn't. And I think about this in terms of an individual who feels like they don't belong, or newcomers who are made to feel that they don't belong, even though the rules and regs may make it look like they do. I wanted to. That was not my planned beginning, and it is. But it made me think about this. On the outset, it's not controversial, but sometimes it is for me. A world, a village, a street with belonging is where everyone can feel that they belong. And if they don't feel that way, then just by my perspective, it's not a belonging community. I wanted to. You mentioned my book very kindly, and other books written by my fellow panelists. I want to just recite a title of a book that was written in 1967 by Martin Luther King. I'm sure some of you, maybe a lot of you, know about it. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And that book, which is still available, of course, contains a lot of essays about work, about education, about things that we all have a right to, and yet if we're not able to experience that, including what I see as the right not to live in poverty, then the belonging part can be hard. I simply will define belonging as that feeling of being at home wherever you are. Having a sense of agency, a sense of place, and I would add a sense of grace, to be seen as yourself and show up as yourself, but I also feel very strongly that this relates to entire groups of people who are marginalized all the time, including in the UK, where asylum seekers officially don't exist. How can you belong if you don't exist? I came up with something not very original. The letter P. Today is brought to you by the Belonging Forum and the letter P. A sense of belonging is about our connection to people, to place, to power, and to purpose. And I know that this panel is about sense of place, but I feel that they're all very much interconnected. And these can be the places where we work and where we choose to work from. These can be places of worship for people of faith. These can be schools and kids, as well as educators who may feel bullied and so on and so on. But it also has to do with resources, financial resources and other resources that go into making community. So while I believe each of us as individuals have both rights and responsibilities to be part of community, if we don't see the resources go, for example, to things that at least I used to take for granted, having a post office near where I lived, being able to do my banking or go to the chemist and talk to a human. What a novelty today, and that we need to really to stand up and fight for these. I realize I've got 1 minute, so I am going to surprise someone, two beings in this audience, Mikey Holland Spook, to say, to give you an example of what belonging and community are in action. Mikey happens to be a dear friend, as is Spook, and his wonderful dog, the best trained dog in the UK. And they hail from a village called Bridgefoot in the Lake District. And Mikey recently moved back there, and he went to the village hall. So much to talk about village halls. And he and Spook went to the every week, every couple of weeks, where you can go and get your dog trained, because someone that he went to school with probably forever, up through teenage years, she runs this in the village hall. And they went there, and the trainer said, well, what do you Spook is Spook. He's all trained and this and that. What? I just wanted to check it all out. He went again, Spook and Mikey, the next time, and all the same people were there. Yes, if you need your dog trained, you can go there too. But the point of it is that people keep going back and back and back for community. And to end on, I have a student colleague at Oxford University. She's just gone to York, but that's besides the point. She took an art class. She was feeling really lonely. She took an art class. She chose one in a village in Oxfordshire, because all of the people there were much older, and we look at things with something that we did called the belonging barometer, and looking at groups of people that tend to feel a lack of belonging all the time. She wanted to be there. She's an artist. She was already an artist. Her name's Pranika Anand. She finished the art course. She showed me what she did. I said, this is great, but you're really good. You're an artist. Or don't you want to go on to the next one? She said, no, I want to go back to this one. I've made friends. It turns out no one in that course in years has ever left level 1. So I just wanted to give you a couple of things to think about there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. William.
Good to be here. Thank you. A few observations first. I think the disconnectedness, social isolation, loneliness that we're experiencing is a worldwide phenomenon. Atomization, for instance, is a major challenge currently for the Chinese Communist Party, just as it is the epidemic of poor mental health is a challenge in the West. Deracination, semi-nomadic lives, dormitory towns, and empty churches are the products of modernity, or at least these are the destinations where the modern world has led us. Material wealth combined with spiritual weakness. I don't think human beings have changed so much as the conditions that we live in have changed. What we've lost is a life in common, or of being together. A desire to be together still exists, I think, but it's harder to fulfill. So a few days ago, I was in the Oxfam bookshop at Keswick, and I spotted a book which on its spine said Yearbook for Scotland, 1961. I picked it up. I wondered what it was. It was the Tory party's Yearbook for Scotland. It was 380 pages of committees, of honorary chairmen and branch treasurers and so on, all over Scotland. It was massive. It's an astonishing book, and I was flicking through it. The Conservative Party at that time had 2.5 million members. Astonishing levels of participation. I looked into the next house to me, my house in Orkney, and found the name of the treasurer who was actually in charge. It was astonishing. That's long gone. It's a fraction of that now. Ben Cobley recently wrote in The Critic, "The habits of participation, chairing meetings, minute-taking, now seem arcane and irrelevant to many. And so many of these little groups simply dissolve and melt away, leaving a vacuum in their place." That vacuum, I think, is being filled with technology, and in particular, people gazing endlessly at screens of various kinds. Smartphones intervene between people, literally, quite often, people leading parallel lives at the same dinner table. That's what we're faced with. And this addiction leads to cognitive deterioration, anxiety, depression, loss of sleep, loss of concentration. 1/4 of 5 to 7-year-olds now have smartphones. They're designed to be addictive. Personally, I think smartphones should be banned for the under 16s. Other solutions. First, place. Quote, "For most people, the meaning of their lives is a local affair." That's John Gray. I think he's right, as he is on virtually everything. Solutions, I think, will always be local at the parish level. There's a new film out called The Outrun. It was based on a book by an Acadian author called Amy Liptrot. And she wrote about her experiences in London as a young person dealing with alcoholism. And she left and went back to Orkney, where she was from, to deal with it, to get over it. And the most interesting insight in that whole book was the fact that in Hackney, in her late 20s, her friendship group was actually very narrow. It was basically people of her age, of a similar outlook, with similar habits. Curiously, when she went to Papa Westray, there was only 80 people there. So you had to interact to work, so the island works. And so counterintuitively, social life in Hackney was actually very insular. Social life in Orkney was very varied. Key insight. So I think the solution will always depend, to some extent, on somewhere. It depends on a place. Secondly, communion. As a society, I think we're doing as well as any society could, which is in a process of losing its principal belief system. During the 2019 election campaign, I was at Leeds University Hustings, and a student asked me, what is the SDP going to do about my mental health? And I talked about the NHS. What I should have done is ask the student, had they considered going to church? Maybe that would have gone down worse. But what I'm getting at is that the church used to provide this spiritual foundation. And I actually attend church. I think for me, it's about belonging, not belief. I don't believe, but I do attend. Lord Home once asked Harold Macmillan if he could put his finger on the point in time when the slide in values in Britain began to set in. His answer came without hesitation: the day that people stopped going to church on Sunday morning. I think that's probably right. So finally, I'd like to end on an optimistic note. I think beneath the surface, there are communities wanting to be convened. And during the lockdowns and the pandemic, in my own home village in Corbridge in Northumberland, we organised support groups basically for people that needed prescriptions or food or whatever. And we were absolutely inundated. We divided the village into sections, and the level of volunteering, I'd never seen it before. It was absolutely astonishing. So in a crisis, people really rallied round. We couldn't deal with the level of volunteering. So in a crisis, there was a massive urge to participate. And I think that showed a latent desire to be in a community and be part of it. I think it's there, and our job is actually to find it and convene it.
Thank you. Christopher.
Thank you to Kim and to William for opening up the topic so well. And I hope I can take the discussion in a slightly different direction because I want to speak to you about ping pong, table tennis, or as Boris Johnson once famously called it, whiff waff. And how can this create community? But before coming to that, I'd like us to think about freedom, in particular the difference between freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from restrictions is the dominant understanding of freedom in Western culture today. This is understandable because the removal of restrictions that expressed racial and gender prejudice has been one of the triumphs of modernity. But like a blowtorch that is used to remove paint from wood, once the paint has been removed, if you continue to use the blowtorch on the wood, you will burn it and eventually destroy it. This is what freedom from has become. Once used to remove prejudice and injustice, it has now become all-consuming. The path to freedom has become identified with the removal of all restrictions. Freedom from is summed up by the phrase, "Leave me alone." But the outcome of this wish is precisely that you are alone. So this negative view of freedom fosters the growth of loneliness experienced by so many people. By contrast, freedom too offers a future where people are not left alone. Freedom to do what is the question this raises. My answer is summed up in the phrase, "Count me in," the opposite of "leave me alone," by which I mean count me in to help create community. Freedom, too, is here understood as freedom to pay attention to other people, to pay attention to other people. In his recently published book entitled On Freedom, Timothy Snyder asserts that freedom is about knowing what we value and bringing it to life, and that involves other people. He goes on to say that virtue is an integral part of freedom, that is to say, the habit of paying attention to others can be cultivated and learnt and should be a key feature of education. A path between leave me alone and count me in has appeared in the form of the digital world, which William's already referred to. Here, somebody can apparently be both physically alone and digitally connected. If freedom is paying attention to others, then can the digital world be part of that? At a level of communicating information, such as come to the meeting next Monday, yes. But at the level of really meeting people, no. And the risk here is that paying attention to my device replaces paying attention to others, even at the dinner table, as William said. The digital world can make connections, but it cannot make relationships. And that takes me back to where I began, table tennis. How table tennis can build relationships. A man in Brighton had a talent for table tennis and competed at national level. So he set out to use this talent as a way of paying attention to other people in Brighton where he lives. He set up the Brighton Table Tennis Club. I recommend their excellent website, with an emphasis on paying attention to people on the margins. This includes people with physical disabilities. 2 members of the club won medals at this year's Paralympics in Paris, one of them aged 14. There is dementia table tennis and table tennis for the children of refugees who feel so isolated. And while some kids play, other family members are in the cafe that is one of the club's partners, learning how to cook healthy food. Something as humble as a game with a plastic ball and wooden bats and a table can be an expression of freedom that pays attention to others. To see other possibilities of growing community, We need to move beyond freedom from restrictions, not leaving it behind, not forgetting it, but realizing that freedom to pay attention to others is the real freedom we need today to build community.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you very much. I feel a little bit of a fraud here. I don't necessarily have the intellectual and spiritual and kind of academic input. My main reason for being here is I did that very modern thing of having a series of kind of deeply personal reflections and posting them all over Twitter. And those reflections were that I was lonely. I felt a period of time where I felt lonely, and I opened up on that. So I wonder if I'll just trace that a little. So, I mean, essentially, me and my wonderful wife decided to treat ourselves. We have 7 children. We need respite now and again. We took a trip to Settle on the train. Carlisle to Settle. It's beautiful. I recommend it. It's cheap, affordable. It's very good. And we went, lovely day, raining, went into a pub. And in this pub, I still remember, actually, cheese pie and gravy. It was delicious. But next to the fire were 4 men, just supping their pints, doing absolutely nothing. Just sat, just talking, just shooting the breeze. And I looked at them and I thought, that reminds me nothing so much as my own childhood, of my granddad, my dad, the dominoes, the billiards, the bridge club, the cricket club, the Legion, the social, mass. And I thought, I don't have that. I don't have that. I'm lonely. And when I say lonely, I don't mean alone. I mean, I don't have male companionship. Now, of course, as soon as you open up that door, in comes, these feelings of envy also come accompanied by a load of guilt, because you think, well, is something wrong with me? By all accounts, I'm doing okay, professionally doing all right. I've got a family who are wonderful, who I love to bits. Are they suddenly not enough? Is this what midlife crisis is? Am I about to go and get my ears pierced? But actually, I think it was possibly a bit more than that. I think it was possibly a reflection of the fact that my life had followed a different path to my gramps and to my dad. And with that have come trade-offs. See, my life was a bit more rootless. I followed the social mobility dream. I moved around. I followed the career path. I looked after my family. I was provider. I was protector. And I thought I was doing the right thing. But the trade-off was that I lived a fairly shallow existence in friendships and in place. And that comes back to bite. So anyway, like I say, I took to Twitter, shared that with the world. And I've got to say, the engagement blew me away. I thought I might be a little bit of a minority. And that wasn't the case at all. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of replies and actually lots of private messages too, 143 all told, because I tried to respond to them all. And if I'm honest, it was naive. There were some guys who were really struggling and I didn't have the ability to help. But one thing that came up time and time and time again was, this speaks to me. I've got a family, love and adore my children, my wife. I'm doing okay at work, and there is a hole. There's something missing, and I don't know how to speak about it. So, I mean, from that experience, there was at least something positive to know that it wasn't just me, that this is something more broadly, and the demographic that I had in mind, the kind of similar to me, it seemed like it wasn't something we're talking about a great deal. And so from there, possibly just a few reflections, if that's okay, just to kind of grease the wheels a bit. Firstly, so much stuff, when I started looking into this, so much stuff keeps on telling blokes to talk. And I do get it, it's good. But actually, I would feel like I didn't really want to talk. It just felt, I don't want to seem kind of like caveman, but it just felt a bit cringe. What I wanted was stuff to do. I wanted to be with people and do stuff and just kind of know that somebody's got my back like I've got theirs. That was a big thing. Next, and this is, well, it's about the midlife crisis thing. I adore my Mrs. Merrick. She's absolutely wonderful. But I do wonder if my commitment to try and be a good dad and a good husband meant that my life was work, home, office, home. That was the way I was being the modern man. That's the way I was fulfilling my obligations to my family. And I wonder now if that has just concentrated down my social relationships to such a narrow circle, in a way that when I speak to my wife about this, she doesn't feel, because ironically, she raised the children. She gets out to groups all the time. She meets loads of people. And that wasn't something that I had. So I wondered if there was something there and that needs an action, but we men aren't great at going and being sociable because, again, cringe. So And then, two last quick thoughts. Anybody who knows me knows that I will rant about social mobility given half the option. But there is a reality here. And the reality is that within education, and picking up on the Abbott's comments here, for so long we've had this kind of Odyssean myth of self-empowerment that education is freedom. It's freedom to raise above and beyond. It's freedom to leave. I mean, even the language we use, to not be constrained or restrained by your background or your circumstance or your parents' wages. I just think we get that wrong badly. Firstly, we get it wrong what it means to be educated. To be educated isn't to be free of everything. For me, it means to be more deeply embedded, more inculcated, more kind of inducted into the wider society and culture around you. But secondly, we get it wrong because, as I said in the talk that Tiffany referred to, it kind of means that success means not being like your mum or dad. And that means leaving. It means going away, getting your degree, going to find the grad jobs and going to the places where the grad jobs exist, which is quite often, I grew up in Stockton-on-Tees. It's not there. It's somewhere else. So social mobility is a factor here. And the last thing, the church. So when I spoke yesterday, I have this terrible habit that I sometimes, I manage, my mind runs away from me and I put things in great kind of metaphysical kind of terms. And I talked yesterday in education about the problem of disenchantment and alienation. And I like to think I've got quite a robust faith, and I didn't know if that was a problem. But I suppose the flip side is that even with the big picture stuff, there is also practical stuff that can get in the way. And so I suppose a challenge to my own community. I now live near Carlisle, which historically had football clubs, a Catholic church which had football clubs, it had boxing clubs, it had social clubs, the beer was cheap, the nights were long. It was that kind of place. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't know what exists just for the males anymore. And I don't mean just for the males to be exclusive, but for males to primarily come together. It doesn't exist. But in those 143 messages, I had 14 invites to join Andy's Man Club. I had 6 invites to join the Freemasons. Those who know anything about us Catholics will know how that went down. I had 3 invites to come to the local mosque. One of them from a woman, actually, who said men need their time together. I had 3 invites to become a Buddhist. I had precisely 0 invites to come to church. I don't know if that is something for us to think more deeply about. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave.
Thank you. As Margaret Thatcher might have said, there's no such thing as community. The holy trinity of undergraduate sociology, Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim and Max Weber, they describe the shift from community and tradition through to where we are now, capitalism, rationality. They had different takes on it, but that's broadly what they were talking about. Another sociologist, Ferdinand Tönnies, he talks about Gemeinschaft, community, and Gesellschaft, society, again, describing that shift. The upshot of what they were talking about was that as we gained in human freedom and material well-being, we also lost in terms of having weaker social bonds, more shallow social bonds. We also had this problem of meaning with the decline of religion, as others have spoken about. And also, we were then faced with this issue of having to create new solidarities from somewhere. And I think that's something we're still grappling with. But I think today the discussion of community is quite different. I think those questions remain, but we're not talking about how to organise society anymore, or about the way we organise ourselves as a species, the kinds of settlements, the kinds of relationships we have. We're talking more, I think, about that sense of community, which I think in itself, by talking about a sense of community, we're acknowledging that community as a thing doesn't really exist anymore. So despite the greater freedoms, more mobility, more choices, we still want to feel like we belong. There's a social animal part of us that needs that. Now, my community, and I should do air quotes for this because I don't think community exists in that sense. I don't think they're my community, but I've got no other words for them. They came to national attention with a petition, and the petition was against the opening of Gales. Now, For those of you who don't know, Gales is a chain bakery. And what they objected to most, or partly, was the fact that it was a chain, it wasn't independence. So in part it was snobbery, the snobbery of the village hipsters. They actually live in a place called the Village, and they didn't make that up. I think they would have called it that anyway, but it actually was called the Village. And some unkind people called them the Village Idiots. I couldn't possibly comment, but it was also tribal. The owner of the company that owns Gales, he's also pro-Brexit. He's an environmental skeptic. He's anti-woke, and worst of all, he's pro-Israel. So he didn't accord with their values, essentially. The hipsters also joined the old radical left and the pro-Palestine lobby in the biggest counter-protest in the UK, in my part of North London. The far-right thugs who they were there to protest against didn't turn up, which may be because they didn't really exist in any... I think they were last seen back in the 80s. But also, it was a hoax. But they were very proud of themselves for being there. I think they saw themselves as the descendants of the Battle of Cable Street, and you know they haven't stopped going on about it since on WhatsApp. But I think we might not know who we are, but I think we know that they don't like us. By they, I mean the political and the media elites. I think that they've done their best to shut people up. Or even lock some people up, not just those who took part in the riots, which obviously was a bad thing, but also people who said things out of turn on social media. So I think instead of listening to people and what they were saying, there was just this clampdown. And at the same time, there was an indifference to people's concerns. So burglaries, for instance, across half the country, they aren't even investigated. No burglaries at all are solved in half of areas across the country. Shoplifting has also rocketed. Violent crime in communities, whether it's random violence, knife crime, even terrorist incidents, they're treated as if they're a routine part of daily life. So there's this general sense of indifference to people's worries and concerns. But beyond these violent convulsions, I think we live more anxious, privatized and hybridized lives. And so a singular sense of community to which we might all belong feels more alien than ever, I think. I think you can see that in the conversation about British values. We struggle to actually articulate what they might be. And there's always two words that come up: toleration and diversity. Now, I'm all for toleration, but it's usually toleration of somebody else's values. Toleration of ideas and debate, I think that's absolutely right. But it's interesting, it's always someone else's. It's not, what are our values, for instance. And the discussion about diversity tends to celebrate atomization and to celebrate fragmentation, which are the two things which are kind of what's brought us to this point, that celebration of difference over commonality. So in my view, just to conclude, I think the only way forward is to use opportunities like this, the heat of debate, to forge a new set of values, a new sense of community and belonging through hammering out ideas.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel.